Hello there. Today I'm starting to take a look at a few wines that I've purchased from the Napa Valley in California. So this is Stags Leap Wine Cellars Karia Chardonnay 2018. So Napa Valley white wine. And Stags Leap, of course, are possibly one of the most famous wineries in the United States, having won in 1976 a tasting held in Paris, that now known as the Judgement of Paris, that is seen by many commentators to be the first time that American wines demonstrably proved themselves to be the equal or better of their French counterparts. So the Stags Leap Vineyard Cabernet Sauvignon on this occasion beat both Haut-Brion and Mouton-Rothschild in this tasting. And the Winiarski family had really only set up the winery a few years earlier, in the early 70s. 1972 had been their first vintage. The Winiarski family have two vineyards on the site here, so one Stags Leap vineyard and the other the Fay vineyard, both predominantly planted Cabernet Sauvignon with small amounts of Merlot, and I believe there's Petit Verdot there as well. And while the wine cellars are famous for their Cabernet Sauvignons, they do also make Chardonnays, and this is one of them. Karia evidently is a Greek word meaning elegance. And I think of the Napa Valley as being quite a warm area, even for the growing of Cabernet Sauvignon. So elegance isn't necessarily the first thing I think about when I'm considering a Chardonnay from this region. But looking at the fruit sources they're using, you see that it's from the cooler, more southerly areas, such as Carneros, Coombsville and Oak Knoll, that they're getting fruit, along with a certain amount of fruit also coming from Atlas Peak. So these are the cooler areas of the Napa Valley. In 2018 there was quite a wet winter, there were late season rains. As a result, spring growth actually took off really quite quickly. Budding and flowering was quite late, but there was good fruit set. There was a hot July, but the summer that followed was generally fairly temperate. There was sufficient heat to ripen the fruits, but there weren't heat spikes. And then in fact in September it became quite cool, extending the end of the harvest out and allowing the grapes to finish their ripening very slowly. Now, nothing in the notes that I've seen for this vintage suggests that this is anything other than 100% Chardonnay. However, I have seen other vintages more recently being produced where the notes suggest that they put Muscat Canelli into the blend, with the remaining 99.5% of the wine being Chardonnay. So there's a possibility there may be a hint of another variety in this wine, but I've not seen any documentation to prove that. The fruit was all hand-picked, and this happened in the early morning to make sure it was cool, to prevent any damage being done to the fruit by intense midday heat. At the winery, the fruit was whole bunch pressed to give lovely clean juice, and 90% of it was run off into barrel to ferment, with the remaining 10% fermenting in stainless steel, giving the winemakers some blending options so that if necessary they could use the tank fermented portion to increase the elegance of the oak fermented portion. The barrels were French oak barrels. I'm assuming they were Ariques, and of those about a third of them were new. The wine then aged with its lees for 7.5 months, with the lees being stirred up during that time. The notes I've got suggest that both malolactic conversion and the use of oak were practiced in moderation to try and ensure the wine remained elegant. So I'm assuming a portion of the malolactic conversion was blocked. So let's see what we make of the wine, shall we? Looking at the colour, I mean, considering this is a 2018, it has, 5.5 years age. That is not particularly deep. I mean, it's a medium yellow colour. There's a vibrancy to it. It's a lovely colour. Swirling the wine, doesn't particularly seem to be... Oh, there we go. It's forming tears on the glass. I mean, the wine is 14.5% alcohol according to its label. So there certainly should be some richness in there, I'm reckoning. So let's see what we make of the aromas, shall we? The aromas are complex. There's an underlying toasty oak that pervades throughout the aromas. Having said that, there's lovely fruit coming through, and that just starts off with a sort of a lemony, grapefruit, citric note, but then quite quickly becomes richer and more peachy. And then you start to see sort of quite a bit of ripeness in that peachiness as well. So the aromas sort of seem to build there to a ripening crescendo. And yes, the oak with a little bit of vanilla perhaps, just sort of sitting toastily behind that. So that's for taste. palate is dry, and an initial freshness is then overtaken by quite a mouthful of sort of buttery, butterscotch, rounded, rich notes coming straight onto the front palate. There's plenty going on the palate here. There's a peachy core of fruit. There's plenty of toastiness beyond that. The richness of the alcohol's emphasising that toastiness, I think. The slightly drying, slightly cedary notes, maybe a little bit of cinnamon there coming through. The wine's quite different on the mid-palate to the way it was on the nose. As of yet, the fruit is still very elegant, fresh peach. It hasn't quite reached that sort of richer, riper note that you saw on the nose. It's interesting that the sort of the butterscotch and buttery notes were coming more at the front of the palate and less so at the back. I kind of assume the two of those will come together at some stage. The finish is somewhat restrained as a result of the alcohol, I think, but there is good freshness. There really is a lemony note running through there. And there is a note of butterscotch sort of starting to come out there, sort of touch of sort of brown, slightly burned sugar note. The wine has reasonable length, and some of those citric, lemony notes are just starting to come through there again. There is a freshness on the finish. It's certainly not a delicate, elegant, fresh, crisp, mineral style of Chardonnay. There really is quite a weight and richness to it. But I think maybe in the context of the Napa Valley, there is some elegance and some slightly lifted fruit. This wine is not quite the complete ripe fruit and oak bomb that it might have had the potential to have been if it weren't for those areas with sort of the slightly less new oak being used, the pulling back the malolactic conversion, that sort of thing. And so actually there is a bit of freshness that lingers. It's not all of the rich weight of the palate that lasts, but there is a lemony, fresh, lingering note even now on my palate. So I doubt this is a wine that will develop much. I think it has all the sort of richness and concentration, and I think those will only increase as the wine stays in bottle. So perhaps it's a wine to be drunk up over the next year or so while it still has freshness that will keep the wine lively to the finish in the way that this does. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. Do also consider signing up and following us on YouTube. That way you can set an alarm and you'll get alerted every time we publish a new video. If you want to know more about this wine, where to buy it, its pricing, or anything to do with that, do please follow the link in the notes below. If you have any comments of your own, please leave those there as well. We'd love to know what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else related to that. If you have any friends you think might be interested in watching our videos, do please forward them to them. But most importantly, do please try and find some time and come and join us for another tasting in the near future, won't you? Thanks again. Bye for now.